Hey class, in this video we're going to do a little intro to Photoshop. We'll kind of go over getting everything set up. So a lot of basics in this one. If you're kind of familiar with Photoshop, this may be a lot of review, but we want to make sure we cover all of our bases. You can see there's a lot on our rundown here. Some of the stuff is pretty easy. Some of the stuff is a little more in depth. I'll try to keep it succinct. Obviously I'm on a Mac. I'm going to go over how we're going to use the file system and things like that. Should basically work the same on Windows, but if there's any differences or you get stuck somewhere, let me know. We can go over it in office hours, but it should basically be pretty similar setup. So we're going to get started. The first thing that we actually need to do is register for the Creative Cloud and download Photoshop. You're not going to be able to do this on every computer. Most computers you will, but if you're on a Chromebook, or something like that, it may not work. If you have any issues with that, again, let me know. But there's a link to get this started in the OpenLab page. So let's go over there. I'm going to start at Brightspace, and there's this link to OpenLab on the homepage for the class. So if you go there, it'll take you to OpenLab in a new window. You don't actually need to be logged in at this point. I'm going to go over that in the next video after this one. But if you go to topics and go to image, you'll see this first link here is to register for the Adobe Creative Cloud. This shouldn't take too long. Downloading the program might take a little while. But basically, these are just some pretty straightforward instructions for signing in to your account. If you're signed up for a multimedia class at BMCC, you get free access to the Adobe Creative Cloud for the duration of that course. So you can use any of the software and download it on your computer or download it on multiple machines and use it for free throughout the semester. The only trick here is just making sure you use the correct login. So you're gonna go to creativecloud.adobe.com. That's what this looks like, and you're just gonna click sign in. And the tricky thing here is that the login you have to use is this login for CUNY, not for BMCC. So it's actually different for me, so it's a little bit confusing. But you should be familiar with this. This is the way that you log into Brightspace and any CUNY-wide service that we have. It's not your BMCC email address. So it should look like this: first name, last name, first name dot last name, and then 2 digits at login.cuny.edu. The tricky thing about this is if you use another email address, like your BMCC email address, it's still going to let you create an account, but you're not going to be able to access the products for free. So if it ever asks you for a card or it says like limited, stuff like that, just make sure that you're doing this right, because you should be able to access all the main Photoshop software for free. So it's going to take you through this login, and then you're going to be able to download the apps. You can download Creative Cloud onto your computer and then manage the apps through there. My sign-in is different, which is why it's kind of confusing to demonstrate, but I'm going to log in. You actually have to do a multi-factor, so let's do that real quick. Okay, so I'm logged in. Notice that I have two different logins here. One is for CUNY BMCC, the other one is my own personal account. And so you can, if you make an account by accident or you already have an account, you can always go back and log out and then log into the correct account. If you go here, you should see, basically what we see here. If you go to the apps section, you should see Photoshop and you should see download. If you see like some other version of Photoshop or something that asks for your credit card or something like that, then the account is not set up correctly. If you have issues with that, we can go over it. But this is what it should look like. You should just click download Photoshop. I already have Photoshop installed, so once you download, you'll go through that process, and you'll be able to open it up. If you have any issues with that part of the process, let me know, and we can go over that as well. But that's basically, the steps that you need to go through. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to our next step. Okay, so once you have Photoshop on your computer, one of the things that we want to do in this course, since it's an intro course, we really want to kind of go over file organization, having everything set up on the computer correctly. It's going to make it a lot easier to work on these multimedia projects that involve lots of files and knowing where your files are and understanding the different types of files. And that's going to set you up, if you're a multimedia major, it's going to set you up for your classes that you'll take after this one to be able to understand how everything works. And if you're not a multimedia major, if you're taking this as a pathways course, it's still going to be really useful. Any job that you might have or any project that you might work on that uses different multimedia files, it's really good to understand how they fit together and how to set them up on your computer. So I'll kind of go through a lot of steps of like creating folders and stuff like that that may seem a little bit tedious, but it'll help us as far as organization goes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my Finder. Finder in Mac is like the File Explorer in Windows. I have my dock over here. If you're on your Mac, you may have your dock at like the bottom of the screen. That's fine, you can leave it there. I like to hide my dock, so I kind of put it over here and I turn on hiding. If you want to do that, you can right click on the dock and it'll show you hiding and then position on screen. And so you can adjust it to however you want it. Just mentioning that in case you're confused why mine looks slightly different than yours. But you'll have this Finder icon, this guy right here, and that's going to open up your Finder where you can look through your files. Mine looks a little bit different, so I'll go over a couple settings that I use. On Windows, again, this is going to be the File Explorer. They work the same way, so it should basically be pretty much the same, but if you have any questions, let me know. So a couple things that I do with my Finder that might look a little bit different. You can see that I'm in the desktop mode, and in the View section, I used columns. So I go to View and then use columns. The default, I think, is something like maybe Gallery. So you see these like big icons. That's kind of nice, but it's not really necessary. So I usually go to columns because this shows me, all the folders on my computer and sort of what's in where. So you can see like, here's my hard drive, here's my users and library and all that stuff. And I can go to the desktop. The other thing that's different is I add this path bar down at the bottom. If you go to View, and you go to, where is it? Path bar. You can see that setting right there. That just gives you, the location where you are on your computer. I find that really useful if you, have lots of files for different projects and you want to make sure you always know where you are so you're not editing the wrong files. It's good to kind of have that visible. So I just have the path bar turned on. You don't have to have it that way, but just so you know why my setup looks like it does. I also took out a lot of the default icons because I don't really use those. So you might see some more icons up here. It doesn't really matter as long as you can kind of use the basic stuff. So this is my desktop. I'm going to create a folder just for the class, and I'm going to put all of my projects in here. So I'm going to right click and make a new folder, and I'm going to call this MMP 100. You can put this in your documents or somewhere else if you want to, but I like to put it on the desktop because it's just easy to find. Inside MMP 100, I'm going to make another folder just for this project because I like to keep things super organized. It makes it easier to make big projects and to find stuff as you're working on it. So I'm going to go to this area and make a new folder. I'm just going to call this image. This is going to be our image project. And so that's where I'm going to save all the files. So I'll keep kind of going over this, not in quite as much detail, but I'll go over these kind of basic setups as we go through different projects in the semester. Okay, so now that we have our folder set up, let's go ahead and open Photoshop. There's a few different ways to do this. You can open it just like any other application. I usually use the spotlight, so I click on this little spotlight magnifying glass here, and I just type in Photoshop, and it should come up. Open it up. You can also, go to your applications folder or your applications launcher, and it's going to ask you to sign in. If you downloaded the Creative Cloud, you might already be signed in. I'll just do this real quick. Okay, so once you're signed in, you'll see the interface here. If you open up your dock, or if your dock is already open, you can right click and go to options and say keep in dock. And so that way it'll always be there. You can drag images over onto it to open them. It's a little bit faster access. You don't have to open it through the launcher or through Spotlight or whatever. So I'll usually add it onto there like that. And then we can just get started making a new project. So we're going to look at our file templates. So if I click on new file, you'll see there are some different defaults. There's defaults for photo editing, for print design, web, mobile, all sorts of different stuff. We don't really need a specific default. I'm probably just going to fill in some settings that I want to use for this particular project. So instead of inches here, I'm going to use pixels. Mostly we're going to be working on digital images, so we don't really need inches here. And I'm just going to do 1024 as the width and 1024 as the height. This is just a good basic starting point for a digital image. For resolution, it doesn't really matter, but I'll just put 72 here because it'll save that in the metadata. You might have artboards turned on. I usually turn this off. It doesn't really matter that much either way, but I would turn that off if you want your project to look like mine. We don't have to change any of the other settings. I just want to point out the color mode. Notice this 8-bit here. We talked a little bit about that in the previous lecture. So that's kind of that bit depth thing that I was talking about. Everything else we can leave the same, and we can just hit create. And it's going to open up sort of the default. It's the first time you've opened Photoshop, you'll get these kind of like little pop-up tutorials. Feel free to check those out. They're pretty informative. You can, if you hover over any of the tools, that's where you'll see these tutorials. So you can play those and you can see a little video that shows you how these different tools work. So that's really useful. I'm obviously going to go over how to use a lot of the stuff, but this is a good way to get started as well. One thing that I usually don't really use, they have this new context menu right here. I find it kind of like clutters up the space. I don't really use it. You can use it if you want. It kind of tries to guess what you're trying to do. So depending on where you are in your project, it's going to show you different stuff there. You can see right now it says import image or generate image. I'm not going to use those right now, so I'm not really, it's not really useful. You can hide this if you want. You can always bring it back if you want to, but I'm going to hide this. There's a lot of other stuff that we can do to change the interface, so I'm going to talk about that for just a moment. I won't get into too much depth here because we can do most of what we need to do with the defaults. But if you go to the window menu, you can see there's all these different windows, and not all of them are visible right now. You can see the ones that are visible are color, layers, and properties. Those are the ones that we're going to be using, so that's a good default. It also has the options, which is the top bar, and the tools, which is the left side bar, and then the application itself is the application frame. You can move and put all of these different windows anywhere you want. So I'll demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to hide my video. One thing we're going to be talking a lot about today is layers. So I might want to put that layers window somewhere that's a little easier to access. And so if I drag this, I can actually pull this window out, and then I can just move it wherever I want in the interface. And then if I want it to stay somewhere, I can dock the window. So if you hover over these kind of like divisions in between the different windows, I can add this. So if I want to put it back where it was, I can just add it over there, but I can also dock it into this section here, or I could put it, over here if I thought that was going to be better. I like to put it like right here, so it's just like really easily accessible. And so that's going to be really useful for me. You can also, collapse these bars. There's a lot of different stuff you can do with these. But I like having the color here. We are going to use the color, and then we'll probably look at the properties as well. So I think this is a pretty good setup. Another thing that you can do that I'll mention real quick is you can save your workspace. So if I go to Window and Workspace, and I want to save this, I could go to New Workspace. I give this a name. I'll call this Owen's Cool Workspace, and just click Save. And now if I set up like a different workspace, or I use one of the defaults and I want to go back to this, I can go to Window, go to Workspace, and I'll be able to reset or go to my saved workspace. So that's really useful, just kind of getting stuff set up the way you like it, and then being able to make changes or make different versions of it. All right, so let's see. we are up to here. Okay, so one thing that's really useful in Photoshop that you won't see at first are the grids and guides. So usually when you start a new project, you just see this blank white canvas, and that's great. You can do lots of different stuff with that. But if you're trying to design something and you want to, align stuff or center things or do other stuff like that, you may want to be able to see a grid overlaid on your project. So if you go to View and go to Show, there's a bunch of different stuff that you can do here. So if I click on this grid, we're going to see a grid of different boxes that we can set to align with our project. You can see it doesn't quite align. There's this like little extra edge to the grid. So what I'm going to do is go to the settings and set that to look the way I want to. So if I go over to the Photoshop menu, go to settings, there's like a million different settings in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go over a few that are good to get started. But if we go to our grids or guides, grid and slices, and we look at grid, we can set the unit for our grid. So I'm going to go to pixels. And I'm going to set a grid line every 64 pixels. And I'm going to do just one subdivision. Or let's do 2 subdivisions. So I'll hit OK. And now we have this grid that lines up really nicely with the edges. And we can move stuff around and use that as kind of a basic starting point. You can also toggle the grid on and off by holding Command on Mac and the quotation mark key. So you can turn it off, see your design, and then turn it back on. On Windows, it's probably Control quotation mark, but it's going to be one of the others, or one of those two. So yeah, having a grid is nice. You don't really need a grid, but I like to design with a grid. And when we start to add some shapes and objects into the scene, you can turn on Snap to Grid. Right now it's turned on. You can turn it off if you want to, but what you'll see is it kind of moves your shapes around to align with the grid, so it makes it a lot easier to make a good design. So there's a lot more you can do with that, but we'll stick with that for now. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is zoom. So as you're working on your project, you're going to want to zoom in and zoom out to see the whole composition and then to work on details. There's a lot of different ways to do this. One of the ways that I will often do it is just using the scroll wheel on my mouse. I have this kind of fancy 3-button mouse that has a scroll wheel in the middle that is really useful for digital design in general, for 2D and 3D. You don't need one for this class. You can use your trackpad or you can use a regular mouse. But if you're doing a lot of multimedia stuff, you might want to get one. This one is like, a little bit fancier. I think, I forget how much it was, but you can get one of these for like 20 bucks. That works pretty well. So I usually use that to zoom in and out, but you can also hit Command plus to zoom in and Command minus to zoom out. That works just as well. And you can hit Command 0 to focus the whole composition. And then you can hit Command 1 to go into 100%. So you'll see what it looks like when you export it. So there's a lot of different zoom options. There's even more zoom options than that, but that's good enough to get started. The other thing that we might want to do when we're zoomed in is move around. The easiest way to do this is to hold the space bar. When you hold the space bar, you'll see a little hand, and then you can move back and forth. You won't change anything in the design. You'll just be moving around in your composition. So that's really useful. I'll do that a lot. I'll hit space and kind of move around, play with some details, and then move back. Then I might hit Command 0 to zoom out. So there's a lot of different, one of the things you'll see and I'll talk about is there's a lot of keyboard shortcuts that make your workflow a lot more efficient and faster. As you use it more, you'll get more used to it. It's a little weird at first if you're not familiar with that setup, but as you use it more, you'll get used to it. And I'll try to make sure I'm talking about all the key commands that I'm using. Okay, so let's get into our actual putting some stuff on the canvas. So we're going to look at the shape tools today. The project for today is just to make kind of an abstract composition. So we're not going to be working with photos or most of the stuff that we actually do with Photoshop, like filters and effects and stuff like that. We're just going to be using some basic shapes just to kind of get used to the basics. So your composition can really be whatever you want, just a combination of shapes and colors. Use it as a way to kind of, make some sort of artistic project. If you want to make something that looks like a design or it looks like some concept, it's really very, very open-ended. You'll see that I'm just going to kind of make some different shapes with different colors and try to arrange them in an interesting way. So let's look at our shape tools. So the shape tool is actually pretty far down on our tool bar here. But you can see, like I mentioned before, there's like some videos that show you how to use it. And if you hold down, there's actually other shapes that are kind of like hidden inside that that first shape. So a lot of the tools do have this option. Like anything that has like this little arrow at the bottom, that means that there's other settings or other tools inside there. So we can hold that down and we can make a rectangle. So I'll just hit the rectangle. And when we make a rectangle, I can start somewhere on my grid and notice, I'm going to zoom in a little bit actually. I'm going to zoom in here so it's easier to see. When I move the rectangle, when I get close to these grid lines, notice that it kind of jumps over to the grid line when I get kind of close. That's called snapping. That's what the snap to grid does. It makes it easy to align your shape with these grid lines. So that's kind of an easy way to do that. So once I create a rectangle, you'll see there's going to be a new layer. And we can turn this layer on and off if we're like changing stuff. And we can, lock the layer if we don't want to be able to select it or change it. But we kind of have this information saved in this one layer. So that way we can, make changes to it that only affect that layer. So let's zoom in on this rectangle and we'll see there's a few properties. In this properties window over here, you can see the basic properties. So it has a width and height. It has an X and Y position. That's where it is in the screen. It has a rotation, and it also has a fill, which is this black color, and a stroke, which is the outline. So we can change all of these things both in this property bar. The options menu at the top here also kind of has a lot of the same stuff. There's just like different ways to access it because you might not have these menus open. So there's some sort of like shortcuts up here that kind of do the same thing. So we can change the fill if we click on here. I'm blocking the menu and we click on the color here. There's some other defaults in here that we can go through, but let's just change the color. So you can see if I let's select like a nice blue color and I hit OK, that's going to change the rectangle. My default colors down here are still the default black and white. So if I make another rectangle somewhere else, if I go over here and I make another rectangle, oh, that one's still blue. I guess the fill applies to, interesting. So the default colors are staying the same, but we still use our fill. Okay. Now I have another rectangle. You can see that it made another layer. If I change the fill for this one, let's see if it changes. I think it's only going to change probably this layer. Let's change it to like a yellowy orangey color. See what happens. Okay, so that only changes this one. And if I make another little rectangle down here, that's going to be yellow. And if I change that color, maybe a light green, something like that, you can see the other colors are going to stay the same. So it's going to use whatever the last color we chose was. There's also a stroke. You can turn this off so there will be no outline, like I did with the green one. Or if I select the yellow one, I can change the color of the stroke. So I can make the stroke like a blue color, or I can choose one of the colors I've already used. You can see these recently used colors. And then I can also increase the stroke size. So there's a little drop down right here, and I can make the stroke wider like that. I can also turn off the fill if that's something that I want to do and just have the outline. So there's a lot of different options for how the style of the rectangle looks. I'm probably going to turn these strokes just off because I think that's going to make it easier for me to do my design. I'm just going to think about the fill for these rectangles. So that's looking pretty good. I've got a couple different rectangles. So when I want to edit the rectangles, I'm selecting the layers, and that kind of selects these different shapes. if I want to move the shapes, I need to choose a different tool. So this is another part where the key commands, can be really useful. There's the move tool up here. This is the V key. So if I want to switch to V and move this around, somehow I changed the opacity, my mistake. Let's turn this back up. Just ignore that. Okay, so if I hit V, I get the move tool and I can move this around. And then I can still make changes to this, but I can't make a new rectangle. So if I want to go back to my rectangle tool, I can hit U and I can make new rectangles. And then I can hit V and I can move those rectangles around. Notice those little pink lines that align to the grid. That makes it easier for me to see how my shapes line up. So that's really useful as well. So the move tool up here is just for moving stuff around. So that's the first tool, and it's the V key on the keyboard. There's also a selection tool. We're not going to use that right now, but we might use that in the future. When we select a rectangle, there's some ways that we can edit it as well. So you can see these little boxes. I can drag these, and you'll notice that it makes the rectangle larger. If I hold Shift, I can make the rectangle, have different dimensions. So if I don't hold Shift, it's always going to stay the same dimension. If I hold Shift, I can make it taller or shorter. I can make it wider or thinner. So let's line that up again. I can also drag this way. And then if I hover kind of above or next to this guy, I can rotate the rectangle as well. So I can make rotations and change all that stuff. So when I make those changes, I don't do this a lot, but you can see these numbers that represent all these properties up here. So for example, if I do a rotation here, you can see this angle number has changed. It's changed over here as well, although it's not highlighted right now. There we go. If we click on it, it'll highlight. So if I want to, set the angle back to 0, I can do that. Or if I want a specific angle like 30, I can plug that in. So when I use the mouse to make these changes, it's just kind of moving around and I'll end up at some random number like 41. But if I want a specific number like 15, I can go in and type it. So that's a useful feature. You can also easily undo stuff. So if I hit Command Z, it's just going to undo that, those changes. But it only goes back to a certain level. You can see that history here. So we can kind of go back through those rotations. And then you can hit Command Shift Z to redo stuff, or Control on Windows. So let's set that back to 0. And let's set this one back to 0. Okay. So let's see, what else can we do? So we've got some shapes. There's other shapes in here. I'm not going to go over those. I'll let you guys, work on adding other shapes, because that'll be a good thing for you guys to kind of play with to learn more. There's these little dots here, which will make sort of rounded corners. That's kind of useful if you want to do those. If you want to make rounded rectangles instead of 90-degree angle rectangles. So that's a good thing to look at. And let's see, let's go back to our rundown. We talked about these, Okay, let's save. Now that we've got something, that we can actually see on the screen, let's save our image. So you can see up here, this is just called untitled, and there's a little asterisk here. Whenever you see that little asterisk, that means you haven't saved your work. So if I hit Command S, I'll be able to save this file. If I go to File, Save As, that's the same thing, or just save once I've already saved it once. So I'm going to save it, and now I'm going to go to my desktop and find my MMP 100 folder. If you don't see this sort of menu, you may be in this view where it's just going to kind of save it wherever it thinks that you're on the computer. You want to make sure that you're in the right place. So if you click this drop down, you'll see a whole Finder window. So you can go to the desktop, find MMP 100, go to your image folder, and we're going to save this. This is our abstract composition, so I'm just going to save this as abstract.psd. PSD is Photoshop document, and the Photoshop document retains the layers, so we can make edits in the future. When we export the image, you'll see you're not going to be able to edit that in the same way. So the edit document is kind of like our film or something like that, like when you shoot a bunch of film, then you edit together, and then you have your movie. The edit document is like the editing process. So it's going to save all the changes that we make, so we can, you know, go back and make further changes to that later. So we're going to click save. You may get a pop-up that says, do you want to save this in the Adobe Cloud? My experience is that our access to the Adobe Cloud doesn't really work that well, so I don't recommend doing this. Also, if it asks you for access to your files, just say allow, that's fine. So I don't recommend saving it in the cloud. I recommend just saving it on your computer. The other thing is you're going to lose that cloud storage at the end of the semester because they reset all these accounts. So if you forget to download your stuff, you may lose it forever. So I recommend saving it on the computer. If you save it in the cloud, that's okay. You can still use it, but you can't turn in a cloud document. So when we turn these in, you're going to have to download it. So, you know, that's fine. If there's any issues with that, we can go over it in office hours, but my recommendation is just to save it on the computer. So I'm going to hit OK here. So now my document is saved. And if I make changes, so I'm going to hit V and move this rectangle over. Let's move it over here and line it up. Notice there's a little asterisk here. That just tells me I haven't saved my work. So if I hit Command S, it saves it, and now I'm good to continue working. So this is looking kind of interesting. It's pretty simple, but let's see what else we can do. So I already talked about this. You know, each time you make a shape, it adds a layer. If you want to, at some point, you can put all these layers together. So you can merge shapes into one layer. It's going to make some changes. Like you can see it change the color and stuff like that. There's no real reason to do this at this point. So I'm just going to undo that. It's going to make more layers as you add shapes. That's just kind of the default way that it works. Okay, we already talked about this stuff. Talked about key commands. We can lock layers. I already kind of talked about that. That might be useful because if you're like, if I am moving stuff around and I'm just clicking on stuff, you can see I can click on all of my different shapes and move them. If you don't want to move a shape, you could lock the layer. And now I can like move these guys, but I can't move this. So if you've got a lot of stuff going on, that just makes it easier to lock things in place so you don't make mistakes or move things by accident. We can also name layers. So these are all just called rectangle, but if I click on this, I can call this like big blue rectangle. It might be easier to like find stuff. It's not really necessary at this point with a simple composition, but as your composition gets more complex, naming the layers is really useful. One thing that you'll sort of, as you're working with Photoshop, is you'll notice that it's not always 100% intuitive as to like how to actually select something. Like it makes sense if I click on this, I can move it. If I click on this layer, I can move this. But sometimes you're going to run into cases where you think you're moving one thing, but you're actually moving another. So just watch out for that. Just, you know, make sure you're clicking on the right stuff and using your layers. We can change the way that the layers move together. I only have a couple more things. Actually, let's, okay, I'm going to swap these. I'm going to do blending modes next. Okay, so we can also group our layers. So if I select all these layers and then I click on this folder button, they'll put them in a group. And I can name this group as well. So I can call this like rectangles. This is another way to make this really organized. If I have like a lot of stuff going on, I can move this group. But the other thing that's really useful is now I can move this whole composition. But I have to, let's see, use the move tool. Maybe I want to use the select tool. No. Okay. Let's see. I should be able to move. Let's see. If I click on the folder, hold on, let me pause for a second. Okay, so if we want to change this whole folder, what we have to do actually is go to Edit and Transform, or we can hit Command T. So if I click on the folder and then hit Command T, now I can move this whole thing. I can rotate it around. And so when I group these guys together in a folder, now I can kind of design using this whole thing as like a little composition. Let's do 90. Oops, I guess that was -90. Okay. And the other thing I can do that's cool is, okay, when you're in free transform, you do have to hit enter to accept the transform, or you're not going to be able to get out of it. So just hit enter when you're done moving it around. So the other thing I can do now is if I hold the option key and drag an object, it'll make a copy of that object. So that's really useful. But that only copies, each individual thing. If I go to my layers and I duplicate this group, now I have two of these guys, and I can move one of them. So I'm gonna hit Command T and then move this second layer over here. And I can keep doing that. I can make as many of these guys as I want. Let's move this guy down here. Actually, I'm gonna try to see if I can do something interesting with this. Okay, so I'm gonna layer these guys on top of each other, and the last thing I wanna go over is blending modes. So this is a little more advanced, and we'll talk more about this stuff in the future, but one thing that's pretty cool with Photoshop is that we can change the way the layers interact with each other. So I'll do a couple examples of this. Let's turn off our copy for a second, and I'll just click on like my main rectangle here. And actually, let's move these guys down into this rectangle. Okay, so now that they're overlapping, if I shake the big blue rectangle, I can do simple things like change the opacity so it's a little bit see-through, so we can see these other shapes more. But I can also change this blending mode. So you can, if you hover over these, actually it's on the bottom, so let's put this up here. Also, yeah, that's another good thing to look at is the order of layers matters. Anything that's above something else will be on top of it. So you can see when I move this layer up and down, it's below all these shapes and then it's above. So let's show the opacity again for a second. So yeah, if we have it a little bit see-through, we can see those guys below it. And now if I change the blending modes, we can see it combines these colors in different ways that are kind of fun and interesting. These are based on like different math things, but we can get some pretty interesting different results with this. So let's do like a multiply. We get some kind of interesting colors there. And then if we bring back our other rectangles, we can do this with the whole group. So with the group, let's move this up here like this. With the group, or no, actually, let's go back down here. With our group blending modes, the default is pass through. That means it just kind of ignores it. But if we turn this on, we can do different blend modes here. So we can get some different results. So something like that is kind of cool. That just kind of like cancels it out. That one's kind of interesting. That one's kind of nice. So you can start to play around with how the colors interact in an interesting way. This gets a little more complicated. You don't necessarily have to do this for your project, but it's kind of a cool way to make some different designs. So yeah, I think that's most of the stuff I want to cover. Make sure you save it. I already talked about this, but make sure you save it and save it on your computer, not in the Adobe Cloud, unless you kind of already know what you're doing a little bit. I like this composition. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. So what I'm going to do is just take both of these guys and do Command T and just make them take up the whole window. Let's select everything. Okay, so I'm just going to make this whole composition take up this whole space, and that way I can export it. So it's not the most amazing composition in the world, but it's got some interesting shapes, it's got some interesting colors, and so that's going to be good enough for this intro project. So for you guys, I would recommend playing around with the different colors and different shapes, and coming up with something that kind of is an interesting combination of color and shape. I kind of like how there's a little bit of symmetry to this, but there's the left side and the right side are kind of like offset a little bit. There's some different color schemes going on. Since I'm blending all these colors together, we kind of are highlighting different parts of the scene. So again, this is kind of a simple project. You can play around with this more, but we're really just getting used to these new tools. Again, for some of you guys, this is going to be really easy. Maybe you've used Photoshop before or other image editing programs, and it won't seem that interesting. For other of you guys, it's going to be completely new, and each part of this may be a little confusing. So, you'll know where you are in that spectrum. If you have any questions or you want to go over anything with me, we can do that during office hours. I'm going to do one more video. I'm going to separate it, but we're going to export this image and post it on the blog. So that'll be the last video for this week. So I'll see you over in that video.